The basic idea of the miscellaneous is that there are lots of attributes of things. You look at a strawberry, it's got color, weight, size, it's got some history, it's got genetic information. I mean, there's attribute after attribute. And which ones we pay attention to depends on what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to cook, taste matters a lot. If you're decorating, size and color, it all depends on what you're interested in.
Hi, I'm Marlena, and I did my book review on a book called Everything is Miscellaneous, The Power of the New Digital Disorder by David Weinberger. Here's a picture of the book. David Weinberger also wrote Small Pieces Loosely Joined, and he is the co-author of the Clue Train Manifesto, which is about social networking. This book is based around the 3 orders of order, which David Weinberger defines as the first order, which is a piece of information like a book, a second order, which is information about information, and he gives the example of a card catalog system, and then he also has the third order of order, which is described as the organization of the digital world and the internet. David Weinberger's viewpoint in this book is that information is a social asset, and it should be more public for anybody to link to and organize, and this makes it more valuable as an organizational system. The second viewpoint that David Weinberger supports in this book is that there is no such thing as too much information. The more information, the better, he says. The third viewpoint that Weinberger supports in this book is that messiness is a digital virtue, and messiness leads to new ideas, more efficiency, and more social knowledge.
There's information in messiness, and businesses need that information. So they can be efficient by narrowing their vision, but they're being efficient but not very smart. If you instead structure and order your information so that it's perfectly crisp and clear and everything in its place, you actually lose a huge amount of information. And that costs your business in every way, including in terms of its ability to innovate. Because innovation generally happens at the messy intersections of ideas.
The fourth view that David Weinberger supports in this book is authorities are less important than buddies, and rather than relying on businesses or reviews of product information, customers will trust people like themselves. Weinberger devotes the first half of the book towards giving a brief overview of the history of organization, and he talks about the first methods of organization like the alphabet and how people considered the alphabet arbitrary when it first came out. Weinberger says that the second order of order does not support what society believes today and is not easily changeable. And he gives the example of the Dewey Decimal System, how it supports the ways of the old, and he says how Judaism has its own number in the Dewey Decimal System, whereas Islam, Babism, and Baha'i have to share a number, and Buddhism is actually reduced to a decimal point.
Jews, we get our own integer. Yes! Okay. Islam shares a little bit. They updated this a few years ago. 297 is now Islam, Babism, and Baha'i, which is fine, except that there are many Muslims who do not consider those other 2 religions to be as serious as Islam. They're 19th century religions, so they don't quite have the pedigree, but nevertheless. And then Zoroastrianism, yes, its own integer. And the Buddhists, to the right of the decimal point. They didn't make it. It's just too bad, you know. They should have tried harder or gotten a better PR agent or something, because frankly, it's a little embarrassing to be, you know, only part of an integer.
This example is particularly interesting since this doesn't really coincide with what society's views are today. Weinberger discusses how Wikipedia promotes a new type of authority, and he discusses how Wikipedia is actually more truthful. And he gives the example of how Wikipedia puts up little disclaimers on their websites that people have marked as false or may not be true. He argues that Wikipedia is able to progress more because they're open to admitting their faults and their weaknesses, and this lets it improve itself, whereas other encyclopedias like Britannica might be embarrassed about their mistakes, and it would take more time for them to actually publish a new encyclopedia, whereas Wikipedia you can just change at any moment. Weinberger talks about how the first and second order is not as flexible as the third order, and he gives the example with the periodic table. And with this example, he says that each element is located in a specific spot based on its relationship to the other elements. And so when new elements are found, it's harder to adjust the periodic table so that those elements will fit in. And he gives the example of how when the noble gases were discovered, a whole new column had to be added to the table. I think Weinberger is most persuasive when he discusses how messiness is a digital virtue, and he gives the example of Amazon and iTunes. In these examples, he says people can search for an item or a song using different categories. Different people will search for the same thing under a certain category, whereas someone else might search for something under another category.
You know, metadata might be, if you're looking for the, you know the name of the author. You can't remember what the book was he wrote, so you type in Herman Melville, and you press the search button on some search engine, you know, whichever one you prefer, and you'll get back not just the name of the book. Now, because everything is digital, you'll get back the actual contents. Thank you for Google Print. You'll get back the actual contents. Okay. So now you have a different problem. You remember some content. You say, what was that book? It has the phrase, maybe the first line in it, call me Ishmael. Wonder who wrote that. And so now you search on that, and you get back the author. And what this means is there is no longer any distinction between metadata and data except... Faceted classification, this is North Carolina State University's library, allows you to, as a user, to browse in a tree-like fashion, because that's a very convenient way of browsing, except you get to pick what's the root and what's the next branch. So if you want to browse first by century and then by the author's country of birth and then by male or female, and you can. And if in the next instance you say, you know what matters to me, I want to browse only male authors. You browse first by gender, and then you browse by year or by language. You get to construct the tree. So it has the virtue of trees without the inherent limitation that of trees, namely that you have to browse the tree the way somebody else thought you would want to.
While Weinberger's examples are really fun and informative, sometimes they do seem to drag on for a little bit, and he doesn't really make his point until the end of the chapter, which can be a little bit frustrating for the reader. But he does come back to that same funny tone he has in the rest of the book towards the end of chapter 10. Overall, I think that this book has a lot of important information in it. And I think that anybody who uses a computer or anybody who owns a computer should read this book, because it'll make you really appreciate how things are organized in the third order of order. Thank you. Bye-bye.